Morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It's big shoes to live up to in terms of having the best model for business. I can tell you it's a model we built in a time of crisis, because prior to June 2013 we were just a little chamber of commerce of 20 people doing what we could, and then all of a sudden when the floods came, we found ourselves being emergency responders and supports to business community because there were so significant impacts. So we learned this as we go along. I am not a crisis responder like the folks in this room here. I am a recovering chief economist and trying to do our best in support of the business community. But what's turned out is that this has actually worked. It actually worked. It's pretty simple. As you'll see, it's very bare bones. It doesn't follow any sort of global standard of crisis response management or anything like that. It's simply three little things that rhyme. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit later. I think most of you understand the context of the floods, so I won't get into that in terms of the impacts. But what really became apparent was that no one had really thought about business. And what I'm going to put forward to you today is that business is an absolutely critical part of a crisis or emergency response and recovery, because we all need to get back to earning an income. We all need to be able to get and acquire our daily needs and substances. And so business is a vital part of that. Looks like our screen has gone a little funny. Oh geez. Finicky. There. If you just hit the page down, that's right. The best. Actually, no, you just did this. There you go. So lessons learned, the collaboration we have with the Calgary Emergency Management Agency. We built something that can be used going forward called the Emergency Business Contact Database. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And recommendations that we've learned over the past couple of years. So lessons learned. We learned 10 things through the course of that time in 2013 that I'll work with you. One is that getting business back on its feet is absolutely essential. As I mentioned, once those first critical hours of humanitarian response, people getting food, shelter, water, medical attention, we all crave a desire to return to normalcy. We want to get our lives back on track. And what does that look like? Typically that means being back in our homes, being back in our places of security and stability, but it also means going back to work. It means being able to go to the grocery store and buy your goods and services. But if that reality is disrupted, if we can't go back to work, if we can't earn income, if we can't go buy milk and bread and eggs, life can't get back to normal. Just simply can't. And the reality is the statistics are rather sobering on business recovery after natural disasters. Different studies have shown different results, but the one that we quote often is that after a natural disaster, 43% of businesses that have been affected will never reopen. And of those that reopen, 2 years later, another 28% will fail. And so our role, our desire at the time of the Calgary floods was to make sure that we didn't achieve that kind of statistic, like a 43% failure rate. We wanted to make sure no business failed. We didn't quite achieve that, but we got close. Actually, no, I'm going a little fast. So as I say, after you deal with the humanitarian needs and what have you, we need to get back to semblance of normalcy. And what happens if you can't go and buy your bread and your milk and your eggs, if you can't go and earn your income, populations start doing rather crazy things. They start looting, they start stealing, they start doing damage in their communities because that normalcy hasn't returned. And I put forward to you the notion that getting business back on its feet in all shapes and sizes is a critical part of that return to normalcy. And if no one's looking out for business, we can't get business back on its feet as quickly as possible. And so there needs to be, going forward, a mechanism across all cities and communities to make sure that someone is at least thinking of business, not only in a preparedness model, but in a recovery model. Because we don't want to see these kinds of situations unfolding. When we did studies, we found that maybe 10% of the businesses in our community had an emergency plan in advance of the floods, and that's typically the large companies. They have departments, they have staff that are dedicated to that, but 95% of businesses in Calgary and Alberta and Canada are small businesses, less than 50 employees. And they're so busy dealing with the day-to-day, trying to keep that revenue model going. Developing an emergency preparedness plan is pretty far down on that priority list. And so how do you get business to start thinking about that? How do you start getting them to look up out of from being in the business, looking and working on the business, to begin to put in place plans that will make sure that they can recover as quickly as possible and ensure success after that, and that they don't fail. We found that changing that takes a lot of work. So we tried to shorten that distance between no plan and having a plan by working with CEMA, Calgary Emergency Management Agency, to create a very simple template-based emergency preparedness toolkit. And you can download it on our website, calgarychamber.com/emergency. And it's a couple of pages to just simply fill out basic stuff. Have you got some essentials of food and water in your place of work for lasting a few hours? Have you got the ability to contact your employees in a time of emergency? Have you got an ability to contact customers or your suppliers? Where is your IT system located? Are you backing things up? How do you get in touch with your landlord? All those just simple things that when something happens you need to do, but if you aren't thinking about it ahead of time, you can't do it. So we built that. It's a simple template-based model to enable someone to just fill it out, have it, share it with their staff, and it's a starting point. We then had to start communicating that. We did a lot of communication, and we have since the floods. We've done things every 6 months to try and remind business that they need to be thinking about preparedness, they need to be thinking about resiliency, to have a plan. So we did public service announcements here, me and a colleague from CEMA, talking about business continuity and business preparedness. And that was displayed in all City Calgary facilities for a period of a week. There are hundreds of thousands of sets of eyes on that. But again, it takes time, it takes repetition. As I said, no one was thinking about business in advance of an emergency. In fact, during about day 3 of the floods, Chief Burrell from CEMA phoned me and said, "Can you come down to the EOC? We need to talk." And I came down and he said, "You know what, the reality is we're so busy helping Calgarians that we hadn't thought about how to get business back on its feet. Would you be willing to take on that role?" And as a chamber, that's really what we're all about, is helping business. And we didn't worry about whether someone is a member or not. We went to work on helping the 50,000 businesses in Calgary and the 7,000 businesses that were affected in the southern Alberta region. And in doing that, we knew that we couldn't do it all by ourselves. We're a little team of 20 people who ourselves were forced out of our office because the entire downtown of Calgary was without power for 8 days. So we were doing all this remotely. So we needed to build a team. And so we built something called the Business Recovery Task Force. And that was a group of organizations, all that represent business in different forms or another, post-secondary institutions with their business schools, the Federation of Independent Business, but we also had great support from the City of Calgary and from the province of Alberta. Because it was essential in some of those conversations about what were some of the bottlenecks, the challenges, the frustrations, the questions that we would get. We needed to have the authorities there to be able to give us answers or help find answers for us. It was almost a bit of a triage. We would just daily throw out the issues on the table. We'd allocate them to the right responsibilities and then come back and report the next day. So that was something that we built on the fly. The next thing was to make sure the communication is relevant, it's clear, and it's simple. We all know that the City of Calgary's website crashed during the days of the floods, and so they put up a very temporary-based solution. But social media was ablaze with commentary, some of it official, some of it accurate, some of it unofficial and inaccurate. And what we wanted to make sure was that as businesses began to try and think about getting back on their feet, cleaning out their space if it was flooded, or when is the power going to come back on to our building, we wanted to communicate clearly and with authenticity what the status of the nation was in terms of those issues. And so we worked with CEMA to be the official communicator to business on those issues. So when CEMA had an update on different things about power or inspections, or the city had those kinds of comments, we were communicating that to business. But the reality is, how do you communicate to all the businesses? We only were able to communicate with our members, and we didn't want this to be exclusive to that. We needed to be talking to all the community, all the businesses in the community. So the first thing we did was send out roving kiosks into the communities that were affected by the floods. And we brought bankers and insurance people and City of Calgary officials and Alberta Health Services people and Province of Alberta people to just stand there and answer questions. People who have been devastated by a loss, they could have lost their homes, they could have lost businesses. there's an immense amount of emotional trauma. And they're just trying to figure out what to do hour by hour, day by day. And they have a million questions. And so we did our best to try and bring people and experts into those business zones to just answer questions. And so we brought them to all around the BRZs, the business revitalization zones we have in Calgary, to just stand there and answer questions. And that was very valuable. And then 30 days later, we had one big event at the TELUS Convention Center where we had those kinds of topics and those kinds of experts. And we had 300 businesses come and spend an entire day learning about what they could do to re-enter their premise, what they could do in terms of their rights as a tenant, what they could do in terms of HR policies or IT or rebuilding. We had Brett Wilson come in and talk about what they should be doing to market their business to get back on their feet. So we had real support from the community and real ability to communicate to business how they can recover from this and how they can plan for the next time. We then wanted an electronic tool, so we built something called the Emergency Business Contact Database, and I'll get a little bit more into that a bit later, but it's a free online tool that people can register for, and it's used only in times of emergency to communicate to business, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Lesson number 7 is don't have a model. Have a model and a plan. Don't make it up as you go like we did. I don't think at the end of the day it was essential time loss, but we did lose time in helping business responding from a place of structure. We could have easily run around doing a whole bunch of things, but if it wasn't done in a coordinated way, we knew we wouldn't achieve as much success. So we spent a couple of days talking to chambers in the States that have gone through a lot of these issues with major weather events. We talked to FEMA, we talked to people who have been involved with Hurricane Katrina, we talked to U.S. Small Business Administration, we talked lots of different organizations and found that really no structured model existed. So we built one of our own. It's called the AIM model. It said 3 little words that rhyme: analyze, mobilize, and energize. And it's not rooted in any sort of global standard. I like things in 3s and I like things that rhyme. It's easy to remember. And so what that did is enable us to kind of attack the situation in a structured way. So analyze is all about understanding the depths and the magnitude of the situation. So we sent out staff into the flood-affected zones and began to talk to people and business owners as they are re-entering their premises and understand what's the magnitude of the impact. What do you need? How can we help? And we began to, with those other organizations in the Recovery Task Force, formulate a picture of what the magnitude of the impact was and what the magnitude of the need was. And so then we went to mobilize. That's mobilizing the resources to support business in their recovery. And we did those roving kiosks, and we did the Recovery Expo. So we tried to bring as much information to bear to help answer the millions of questions that they had. But they also needed a voice because they were too busy cleaning out a flooded space to go to the federal government and say, "Dear Canada Revenue Agency, my taxes are due in 9 days. I'm in no position to pay them." They needed someone to take on that role, or whether it was to their landlord to pay the rent, or whether it was to the utility company to pay their bills. Paying tax, pretty low on the priority list right now. So we did that for them. We went and advocated the federal government, with the provincial government, with the landlord, with BOMA, the Building Owners Managers Association, with utility companies, and just said, pull out your due dates right now. Let these companies get back on their feet and do those sorts of things. We also worked a lot with media to talk about the impacts to business and the importance of getting business back on their feet in a quickly and timely manner. And so that was a role we took on the behalf of the affected businesses. And finally, energize. Once the businesses are back on their feet, they've cleaned out, they've rebuilt, they've restocked, the doors are open, but nobody's there. So imagine a small business that you own and going 8 days minimum without a single dollar of revenue. Imagine going 30, 60 days without a single dollar of revenue. Add on top of that the insurance company that's just denied your claim for renovations to your space because it's been flooded. It's an overland act of God. Imagine having lost $50,000 of inventory. That's a huge financial toll for a business. And so we needed to get dollars flowing into those businesses as quickly as possible. But most Calgarians thought, well, I can't go to Chinatown, or I can't go to Inglewood, or I can't go to Kensington because it's a war zone down there, right? There's still trucks and mud and dirt and debris everywhere. But there wasn't. They were cleaned up, they were ready for business. And so we created a campaign to not only tell first Calgarians that businesses were back open, but we took it nationally because people were staying away in droves from Calgary, and we needed to get business back in their feet. So we did newspaper, TV, radio, bus shelters, bus wraps, all those kinds of things, and promoted the fact that the businesses were back open because we needed those dollars and those cash registers ringing again. And truly, it is the support of the Calgary business community, not only in cleaning up business, but getting back and supporting business, that we didn't achieve that 43% failure rate, we achieved a 1% failure rate. So 99% of flood-affected businesses reopened. And that's truly a testament to the work of dozens and dozens of organizations and thousands of Calgarians. If you want to learn a little bit more about that AIM model, we do have what we call the flood story. It's a bit of a play-by-play of those days and the model that we built. It's at calgarys-flood-recovery-story.com. Number 8, the community has a huge role. I've spoken to that. The rebuilding, the spending, getting back and helping those businesses was tremendous. And I think community, and I think Trish said it as well, whether it's Calgary, High River, Bragg Creek, Canmore, communities dug deep and really helped their fellow citizens and rebuilding. That's an essential part of getting business back on its feet. There's no mechanism to assist businesses financially affected by disaster events. That was before the floods. The province of Alberta worked tirelessly to try and support business and creating some funding mechanisms that would help bridge the gap. But the reality is that it didn't come in time. And I look to the States where there are a tremendous number of financial models out of the U.S. Small Business Administration, that from the moment a business is impacted from a natural disaster, those supports kick in, whether it's a forgivable loan, interest-free grants, those kinds of things. There's a far more robust toolkit in the U.S., and this is not just Alberta, this is nationwide. A robust toolkit in the U.S. to support affected businesses. As I say, the province did a fantastic job trying to create some mechanisms, but the uptake was just not significant because they just didn't come in time. People needed the money now. They needed to be able to make payroll. They needed to be able to make rent. They needed to be able to buy their restocked inventory because they just lost it all. They needed some flexibility. Fortunately, the banks were incredibly forgiving in terms of some credit and access to additional debt, but there are other kinds of mechanisms that we can put in place. And finally, we have more work to do at a higher level, and that's across a whole host of topics. That's about getting business prepared. The number of companies that have an emergency preparedness plan in place might have gone from 10 to 40%. So we still have a lot of companies that haven't got any plan in place. 80% of them say they feel better prepared because I think that's because they've been kicked in the shins and they know what to do after a natural disaster, but they're not necessarily planning. So we need to fix that. We also need to make sure that every community around the world is thinking about business and having some organization in place that is going to take the lead on a business planning and recovery basis. And I've gone around many communities. In fact, we were at the World Chamber Federation in Italy this year speaking and won an award for our response, but speaking about the importance of someone in a community leading the business response. I was in Vancouver yesterday speaking to the BC Safety Authority and to the Deputy Minister of Emergency Response, the Board of Trade, talking about these things because it's vitally important, because we want to make sure that 43% statistic keeps dropping. Good. So our collaboration with SEMA, very quickly, I know I'm very short on time, but we became an official partner with SEMA. After the floods, we are their official communicator to business. They've asked us to look after business in times of emergency. There's no formal accountability, but when the Emergency Operations Center is activated, we have a seat, we have a desk, and are part of that team updating and working on the response for community resilience. The Emergency Contact Database is a simple web-based tool. We're encouraging all chambers, at least across Canada, if not around the world, to build something similar. It is a simple web-based platform built off a CRM or an email subscription list like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact. It's very simple, but enables a company to register a name, a company, and a means of communication, whether that's a text, mobile, SMS, email, so they can receive the updates when they come. It's important that it's only activated in times of emergency. We don't sell anything to this list of people. It's purely activated only when the EOC is activated. We have, for example, a little over 2,000 members. We now have 20+ thousand contacts registered in this database. So there's now a very robust core of people that will be getting information on a real-time basis from a trusted source. It also enables you to cross-market things, so when people sign up for that, we say, hey, have you got an emergency plan built? If not, go to this, download the template, fill it out, you've got a plan, very simple and easy to do. Encourages sharing on social media as well. You can tweet or LinkedIn or Facebook the fact that you just registered for this database and encourage your friends and followers to do exactly the same. And then promote the heck out of it. So finally, some recommendations. I think it's important every community understand the level of business preparedness that they have. We know ours is better than it was, but it's not where we want it to be. So whether it's surveys of the business community, understanding what companies have, what resources. A lot of companies that weren't affected by the floods were able to contribute in ways of goods and supplies and staff and volunteers. Understand who can come to the party bringing other kinds of offerings and gifts to support other businesses that have been affected. Develop the tools, the database, the handbook. They're simple, they're easy. If anyone wants to take back in your different communities the templates, I'm happy to share those. As we often say, this stuff is open source. If you want it, you can have it. Take the template, cross out City of Calgary, put in City of Toronto, Vancouver, Saskatoon, Regina. It's yours. We've built it. We have no restrictions on the use of it. Take it and take it back in your community. If we can help save one business because of those tools, we've done our jobs. Communicate the importance. As I say, that's just a repeat thing. You have to do it constantly, regularly, and making sure business doesn't forget about it, because sometimes these events can fade into our memories very quickly. Identifying a lead for emergency response for business. I'm an advocate simply because I am a chamber leader, but advocate the chambers are a great body to be doing that across the world. If you think of any kind of entity, non-governmental entity that exists regularly throughout the world, one is religious organizations, and two is chambers of commerce. They are everywhere. And so I think chambers can play a significant role for being that lead entity in support of emergency response and business continuity. And consider having even basic response plan. Whether it's our cheesy 3 words that rhyme, the AIM model, great. If it's something more robust and more significant, if that works for their community, that's fantastic. But think about having a plan, because while we were successful in minimizing the amount of business failure, some other communities may not have that kind of luxury at the time to figure out what is a model we can use. So that's it. Thanks very much for having me, and good luck with everything in your communities. Thank you.